I have a plan. I have a plan. Donald Trump has no plan for you. The plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan.
Okay, let's compare the plans. Welcome to Swing Voter Central. Hello everybody and welcome back. Before we get started, I'd like to make a little speech. I want to talk to my people, the upper middle class. As members of the upper middle class, we have a very distinct privilege. Our privilege is that no matter who wins this election, we are not going to feel the impact. Not much. If our taxes go up a little bit, we're not going to feel the sting, and we're not nearly rich enough to benefit from tax breaks for the rich. The most privileged demographic in the world when it comes to elections is the upper middle class. What that means to me is that we have a very distinct obligation to use our vote where it is going to make the biggest impact on people who do need support in this political climate, in this economic climate. I think I've made it pretty clear that in this election, I've put a lot of emphasis on blue-collar workers. Because I've noticed that of all these socioeconomic groups in America, these are the people that do feel the biggest impact. These are the people that are watching their jobs fly overseas. These are the people that are just above the poverty line, so they're not benefiting from social welfare. But when their taxes go up and their insurance premiums go up, they feel the sting. Under inflation, these are the people who cannot afford groceries. They don't have food stamps. And so these people are important to me. I've chosen this demographic to focus on for a reason. And it's because I think that supporting the working class during this economic and political climate is where my vote can make the most impact. So the question is, which candidate is going to help these people the most? Which candidate is going to make it easier for Americans who aren't privileged to buy a home or to afford housing? These are incredibly important questions. So let's compare the plans. First up, we have the Harris tax plan. As you can see, everybody from the middle class down stands to save over $2,000. Wow, that's a lot of money. $2,000 to someone earning $19,000 a year, that's a pretty big deal. And of course, of course, she plans to tax the rich, take big chunks of money out of the pockets of the rich and put it in the pockets of the government. All right. This here is the Donald Trump tax plan. And as you can see here, everybody saves. Just not quite as much in the lower quintiles. So it looks like people in the fourth quintile stand to save $1,000 more. But people in the lower quintiles are saving a little bit less. The thing is that looking at these numbers doesn't really tell us who's going to have more money in their pockets. Because let's look at the comparisons by the Tax Foundation. So the Tax Foundation is supposedly our most unbiased source of economic information, predictions. These guys crunch the numbers in a way that should not and historically does not support either party. So let's look at the comparison. These are top-line preliminary estimates of what's going to happen to our economy depending on who gets in office. As you can see, under Kamala Harris, the government is going to earn some big bucks. What I think a lot of people seem to misunderstand is that revenue, that word revenue, doesn't really apply to us, the American people. The word revenue applies to the government. The Democratic philosophy is that we should be taking big handfuls of money out of the people's pocket, mostly the rich, so that we can give it back to the people in the form of government services like welfare and Medicare and Medicaid, which I support. But if you look at the other metrics here, the long-run GDP, which I covered in an earlier episode, the long-run wages and the long-run jobs stand to tank quite significantly compared to the Donald Trump numbers. So it looks like under Kamala Harris, the government will have lots of money, but the people will be earning less and there will be less jobs. Think for a minute. Think for a minute about what you think is more important. That's a complicated question because social welfare is important. But in an economy of $24 trillion, I'm pretty sure that the government can find the funding for lower income Americans. We could take it out of the military budget. There are so many options. So then when we take a look at the Trump plan, it seems like the government stands to lose money out of the government pocket. But the long-run GDP sees a less significant decline. Long-run wages, that's how much money we're earning, will see an increase. And the job loss is not nearly as significant. What most Americans are saying in the polls right now is that having more money in their pockets does make a difference, especially to people who are dancing close to the poverty line. And most importantly, job creation matters to me. I work in tech. My job is going to be safe no matter what happens. So I have to turn my attention to people whose jobs are at risk. And we know that blue-collar jobs have been jumping ship by the tens of thousands, specifically this year. And that matters to me. So this job metric, to me, that's important. This long-run wages metric, to me, that's important. It's up to you to decide. So under the Trump tax plan, we see some very familiar phrases, such as the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, canceling taxes on tips, canceling taxes on Social Security, first-time homeowner support, and of course, the Trump administration wants to decrease the corporate tax rate. Let's talk about that for a second. So historically, Republicans have always argued that reducing taxes on corporations will create more jobs. That has not always been proven to be true. In some cases, and in most cases, as a matter of fact, the Democrats have created more jobs than the Republicans, except under Donald Trump. It appears, based on the numbers and the facts, that Donald Trump's tax plan in 2017 did, in fact, create 6 million jobs. People were earning more money. Groceries were more affordable. So whatever it is that the Trump administration did in terms of economics, it did work. If we look at historical precedent, this hasn't always been a functional plan, but for some reason, somehow, the Trump administration figured it out. And that matters to me. As an upper middle class voter who is not going to benefit from any of this, it matters to me who is and how. But let's keep going. This is the Kamala Harris tax plan. Everything you see in red is a policy that already pre-existed on the Trump agenda that Kamala Harris has decided to add to her agenda. Now, that's not a bad thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The only thing that bothers me about this is that Kamala Harris is campaigning hard on the child tax credit, even though the child tax credit has existed since, I think, the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton, and Obama increased it again, and then Trump increased it again, and then Biden increased it again, and now Kamala Harris, once again, wants to raise the child tax credit. This is an age-old trick in the book for any politician who wants to score voters. Then we have the earned income tax credit, which is in red and blue, because this is a shared plan by Harris and Trump. The only difference is that Trump thinks that this policy is fine as it is, and Harris wants to expand upon it. Next, we have canceling taxes on tips, first-time homeowner tax credit, make permanent the excess business loss limitation for pass-through businesses. Now, this is something that was a Trump policy that Kamala Harris has also added to her agenda. And then Kamala Harris wants to increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. Again, let's talk about this real quick. Increasing the corporate tax rate is going to increase revenue. But the question is, revenue for whom? Revenue for the American people? No. Revenue for the government. This increased corporate tax rate is going to put more money in the government's pocket. Now, if you hear that and you're worried that decreasing the corporate tax rate is going to decrease welfare, Historically, and especially under the Trump administration, that is simply not true. Kamala Harris is constantly wagging her finger in the face of the American people and saying, Trump wants to cut social welfare. That is a lie. Trump does not want to cut social welfare. All he wants to do is make it harder for people to abuse the system and make it easier for system abusers to be lifted out of the system. And I'll get to that in a minute. Finally, Kamala Harris wants to provide tax relief for businesses offering affordable health care. I think that can be a good thing, and that is exclusively a Harris tax plan bullet point. But let's break this down issue by issue, starting with housing. Kamala Harris is offering a first-time home buyer tax credit. Harris supports a $25,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers, which would make home ownership more accessible to a broad segment of the population, especially for those struggling to afford the initial costs of buying a home. That sounds good. Kamala Harris also wants to focus on rental assistance and affordable housing. She has proposed policies to expand affordable rental housing, which is a critical step in making housing more affordable overall. By increasing access to rental assistance, her policies could help families who are currently priced out of both renting and home buying. But let's zoom in on that. Currently priced out of renting and home buying. One of the biggest issues that we're facing this election is the affordability of home ownership. Home ownership and buying a house is a huge part of wealth building in the United States. Owning a house is one of the key elements of the American dream. There is no place in the world like American suburbia. Owning a house is not only important for your economic future in America, but it's part of living the life that makes America such a great place to live. And I think we can all agree, the Democrats and the Republicans, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are all in agreement that home ownership is critically important for all Americans. So the question we're facing now is whose plan is going to make it easier for us all to buy a house? So next, Kamala Harris has a $100 billion housing program. She has proposed $100 billion worth of grants, up to $25,000 for down payments and closing costs for people in America who have lived in historically red line communities. What is a red line community? Unfortunately, in America, we do have a history of racist practices. And in the past, people of color and minorities have been barred or otherwise rejected from housing loans. And this is something that we've been fighting for a very long time. And Kamala's program is to take these people who have been affected by redlining and give them a chance. And I support that. I think that that's a really great program. This is a direct attempt to help low-income and middle-income Americans achieve the American dream and afford a house. But let's go a little bit deeper. The thing about this $100 billion program is that it has to also pass in Congress. The likelihood of this bill passing in Congress is astronomical. The idea that we're going to get bipartisan support on a $100 billion program is low. I would argue at least she's trying, because I don't think it's a bad program. I just don't think it's realistic. I would attribute this to the Bernie Sanders effect, where the Democrats are making promises that they just can't keep. Once again, America, especially upper middle class America, we need to decide where our vote is going to make the most impact. Not what sounds better, but what is achievable in this political and financial climate. Kamala Harris also proposes to build 30 million new homes. But so far she's offered no plan or information as to how she plans to build 30 million new homes. The only thing she has said so far is that she wants to cut the red tape and deregulate home building. Which is funny to me because guess who's responsible for putting that red tape up in the first place? It's the Democrats. The question is, do we trust the Democrats to cut red tape? Personally, I'm going to trust the party that has built their entire political career on cutting red tape, and that is the Republicans. Let's look at the Trump and housing plan. So Trump's housing plan is almost exclusively built on cutting red tape, and slicing through that tape is what Republicans do best. Every time Republicans get in office, they come into the business industry and they deregulate because they are under the impression that cutting red tape improves the economy. Wages go up, jobs are created. So Trump intends to streamline the approval process for housing. He's emphasized the importance of making it easier and faster to build homes by streamlining the permitting and approval processes at the federal, state, and local levels. By speeding up construction timelines, Trump argues that the housing supply can increase more rapidly to meet demand. Again, this is pretty much identical to what Kamala Harris is saying. Cut the red tape, houses will be built faster. Who do you trust more to cut the red tape? That's the question I'm asking. Next, and I think this is important, Trump would like to continue opportunity zones. These are designed to attract private investment into economically distressed communities by offering tax incentives for development. The goal is to encourage investment in housing, commercial and industrial projects in these zones, which include many low-income areas. So every time the Democrats are telling you that the Republicans don't care about low-income Americans, look at the policies. Look at the numbers. Donald Trump also supports the low-income housing tax credit. Now, this is not a Trump policy, but it is a policy that he maintained and supports. The low-income housing tax credit program incentivizes the construction of affordable housing, pretty similar to what we just discussed. This program remained in place during the Trump administration, and his administration supported its continuation. So it seems to me like Trump's plan is to cut the red tape and to boost lower-income Americans into a position where they're able to afford a house. Interesting. Next, the Donald Trump administration supported the Federal Housing Administration Loan Program, which is widely used by low and moderate income homebuyers, particularly first-time homebuyers. FHA loans allow borrowers to make smaller down payments and qualify with lower credit scores, making homeownership more accessible for everybody. So it looks like on the Trump agenda, there is a long list of plans in order to make housing more affordable, not just for the upper middle class, not just for the rich, but also for lower income Americans. The only place we could potentially criticize Trump's housing plan is his opposition to the AFFH program, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Program. One of his main criticisms was that it effectively required local governments to modify their zoning laws to accommodate affordable mixed-income housing. The thing is that when you build low-income housing in high-income neighborhoods, the value of those high-income houses goes down. So it sounds like something that Republicans might oppose, but Democrats would support, because Democrats care about low-income Americans, right? This is my favorite example of liberal hypocrisy, because upper middle class Democrats on the public stage will vocally support programs like the AFFH until plans arise to build low-income housing in their neighborhood. I could name dozens of examples where upper middle class Democrats ran around like chickens with their head cut off to avoid low-income housing being built in their neighborhood. But let's zoom in on a specific example. Let's take a look at Palo Alto, California.
So a few years ago, the city council voted to change the zoning of one section of the city right here. Specifically this 2-acre plot of land. They wanted to change it from low-density housing to higher density housing so that they could build a 60-unit affordable housing complex for elderly members of the community. Okay, so they changed the zoning. Start building the 60-unit complex. No, the overwhelmingly liberal residents of Palo Alto decided to hold a vote to overturn the decision, to revert it back to low-density, single-family housing, back to yellow. And it passed, and the zoning was overturned. So now when you go to this plot of land, instead of an affordable housing complex for the elderly, what you're gonna see is this. A row of just a few houses all of them massive and worth around $5 million each.
I think people aren't living their values. You go to these meetings in these neighborhoods where they're talking about a new housing project, and it's always the same song, and it goes like this. I am very in favor of affordable housing. We need more of it in this community. However, I have some concerns about this project.
We have the hearts to do this, but we're doing it wrong, and we're dictating and harm onto the neighborhoods.
And then off we go with the concerns, and then nothing ever gets built.
Watching the value of your house depreciate is not a good feeling. It doesn't matter how rich you are, because owning a house among the upper middle class is one of the key elements of our wealth building strategy. And this law, the AFFH law, basically forced the hand of the local government to build such low-income housing in these neighborhoods. So it doesn't really seem to matter what the law is, because upper middle class Democrats are going to stand up and fight this law anytime it impacts them directly. I don't want to be lumped in with the group of hypocrites. I'd much prefer to be on the side of the team that says, okay, that's not fair to the people who bought these homes to lower the value of their homes. How about we deregulate this and allow businesses to build homes in places that make a little bit more sense? Let's move on. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump talk a lot about small businesses.
My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start-up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy.
Because our troops and our veterans are this nation's backbone. Because farmers are this nation's backbone. Schools is this nation's backbone. Audio installation specialists and window tinters are this nation's backbone. Because Filipino tilt-a-whirl operators are this nation's backbone.
I'm happy that the Democrats are focusing on small businesses. But the Kamala Harris plan for small business compared to the Donald Trump plan is skimpy. A $50,000 tax credit sounds incredible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every small business that opens under the Harris administration is going to get 50 grand in their pocket. In order to benefit from $50,000 in tax credit, you have to earn upwards of $238,000 during that fiscal year. While the vast majority of brand new startup businesses are earning less than 100 grand, and 80% of those businesses are earning less than 50 grand in their first year of operation. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to benefit from this tax break. Everybody benefits, but you're not going to get $50,000 by voting for this policy. You'd have to earn a boatload of money, an unrealistic amount of money during your first year in order to pocket 50 grand. So I think it sounds better than it is. The question is, which of these candidates is going to be passing more policies? Where is the more significant benefit going to come from? While Kamala Harris is offering you a $50,000 tax break, Donald Trump seems to have a much more fleshed out plan. The pass-through deduction, corporate tax rate reduction, increased Section 179 expensing, bonus depreciation, simplification and reduction of individual tax rates, and other provisions. Among these policies is the ability to write off startup costs for your business, which already automatically covers that $50,000 tax break that was mentioned. Not only that, but under the Trump plan, corporate taxes go down across the board. So you're going to get a tax break. Not only that, but you're going to get a long list of other benefits. So if you are a small business owner, there's only one answer. The Trump agenda is far more beneficial by leaps and bounds than the Kamala Harris agenda, which is why I am so incredibly frustrated by the fact that in every interview and on Oprah and all across the board, she's saying, I care about small businesses and I believe in the American dream. But when you compare the plans, hers is like this big. And Donald Trump's plan for corporations and small businesses is a long list of policies. So to me, if you own a small business, it's a no-brainer here who wins in terms of planning. But let's move on to blue-collar workers, the population that I hold the most near and dear during this election. Kamala Harris does have a quite extensive plan for the working class. Much of that has been copied and pasted from the Trump agenda, but there are a few policies that I can get on board with. Number one would be raising the minimum wage to $15. I don't know why we haven't done that already. I think raising the minimum wage is critically important to Americans during this economic climate. Next, Kamala Harris wants to support unions and workers' rights, and this is an age-old platform of the Democrats. This is why blue-collar workers used to be Democrats, and I think that supporting our unions is important. Unfortunately, the Democrats have also passed endless legislation that has shoveled these blue-collar worker jobs overseas, but that's neither here nor there. Workers' rights are important and unions are important. So this is something I could also support. Next, Kamala Harris wants to expand access to healthcare. As part of her focus on healthcare reform, she's called for expanding access to affordable healthcare for blue-collar workers, including reducing costs for workers' premiums. Now, this is very important to me. Donald Trump wants to repeal and replace Obamacare. And the reason for that is that lower income Americans saw their premiums rise under Obamacare to a degree where they could barely afford healthcare anymore, and that is problematic. Now the question is, do we repeal and replace the entire plan, or do we fix problems with the plan? Kamala Harris says, let's focus on blue-collar workers and making healthcare more affordable. But then the Republicans would argue that there's just no money for that. There's no funding for that unless we come up with an entirely new plan. With the way that the Affordable Health Care Act is structured, it is extremely difficult to lower premiums for middle-class Americans. Can she do it? That remains to be seen. The remainder of the Kamala Harris agenda for the working class is all in red, as you can see, and that is because these are existing Trump policies, such as infrastructure investment, job training and apprenticeships, trade policies to protect American workers, aka the Trump tax that she craps all over in all of her interviews. And finally, support for manufacturing jobs, which is a bold-faced bull crap lie. Manufacturing jobs are jumping ship by the tens of thousands every month, and I do not have an ounce of faith in the Democrats to protect manufacturing jobs because the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the numbers. The Democrats have utterly failed the working class in the last 4 years, and that is why I am swinging right in the middle of the aisle, because I do not trust them to protect and to grow the working class workforce opportunities. I don't believe her for 1 minute when she says that she's going to bring back manufacturing jobs, because she has not done so. The Biden administration has failed the working class, and I am sick of being lied to about manufacturing jobs. And as a matter of fact, the only person who has been what we could call a champion of the working class has been the Trump administration. Starting with this, renegotiating NAFTA. I've mentioned before that blue-collar workers used to be Democrats. There was a time when the Democrats were supporting blue-collar worker interests, especially in the area of labor unions. But at some point, Democrats shifted their focus to other issues, and they left the working class completely out of the legislation, and NAFTA is one of those examples. The North American Free Trade Agreement caused blue-collar worker jobs to plummet and move overseas. And this, I believe, is the defining moment that changed blue-collar worker support for the Democratic Party over to the Conservative Party. And not one single president has cared to zoom in on that agreement and make it better for blue-collar workers until Donald Trump, who walked into office and renegotiated the NAFTA deal. That is an important bullet point for me, because it means that Donald Trump is willing to fight for the people. We are told time and time again that he doesn't care about the people. He only cares about his millionaire friends. How do you explain this? There was significant pushback from the millionaires and billionaires to renegotiate NAFTA because they stood to lose money from this renegotiation deal. But according to Trump, it was important to bring those jobs back to America. How many jobs did we lose under NAFTA? The answer is 850,000 jobs. 850,000 American working class jobs disappeared under NAFTA. And to the Trump administration, that was unacceptable. So for the first time in history, somebody walked through the doors of the White House and said, we're going to renegotiate this deal. He replaced it with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which was far better for the working class and increased manufacturing jobs. This is something I fully support. To me, this is evidence that Donald Trump does not work to appease his millionaire, billionaire friends alone. And I hate being lied to. Next on the list, we have energy sector job support, and this is largely focused on fossil fuel industries. Now, this is where we might lose some Democrats because they will argue that we need to be fighting on behalf of global warming. We need to fix the environment and slow down the global warming. And yeah, that may very well be true. But if you think the Democrats have slowed down fossil fuel production, you're out of your frickin' mind. Because under the Biden administration, the existing drilling sites continue to drill away. Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris are all pro-fracking. They are all pro-fossil fuels. The only difference is that one of those parties is trying to trick you into believing they want to slow down fossil fuel dependence, and the other party is telling you straight up, we have discovered more oil and natural gas under our American soil than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. What we have discovered is that we have an opportunity for energy independence for the next 100 years. And it does not matter who is in office. We are going to drill, baby, drill. And so Donald Trump is transparent about it. He tells you about our economic situation. He tells you about our energy independence. And he tells you that he is going to support jobs in the fossil fuel industry. Because no matter what comes out of Kamala Harris's mouth, she is going to have the exact same ideology. Don't be fooled. We are going to drill harder than ever, no matter who gets in to the presidency. Finally, apprenticeship programs. Now, this was an executive order that was signed by Donald Trump in office to train people who have lost their jobs to alternative energy, to train people who have lost their jobs to technology advancements and artificial intelligence. This is something that Kamala Harris agrees with. This is something that she is adapting and extending. We can support that. Last but not least, let's talk about lower income Americans. Another population that I hold near and dear, another population that matters to me when I cast my vote responsibly. So let's run through the plans. First and foremost, let's talk about prison reform. The Trump administration signed the First Step Act into law in 2018, which aimed to reduce prison sentences for nonviolent offenders and improve re-entry programs for former prisoners. This reform particularly impacted low-income Americans and Americans from minority groups. This was Donald Trump who signed this into action. Prison reform. Donald Trump. Prison reform. Now, I have to tell you, this policy, this act, the First Step Act, started its development stages under the Obama administration. So we can't give Donald Trump full credit for this, but we can give him credit for signing it into action, which means that we have been lied to when we are told that Donald Trump doesn't care about minority groups, that he doesn't care about lower income Americans, because apparently he does. I care much less about personality than I do about action and policy and achievements on behalf of the American people. Another thing that's really important to lower income Americans is economic growth and job creation. And this is where I'm swinging more conservative during this election. And it's because I trust the Republicans far more to handle our current economic climate. Trump's administration focused on job creation through policies like tax cuts and deregulation. This is what our country needs right now. We need to deregulate the housing industry to build more houses. We need to cut that red tape. We need to lower taxes on corporations to create more jobs. This has been proven to be effective by the Trump administration, who created 6.6 million jobs under his tax plan. Donald Trump's tax plan contributed to wage growth and lower unemployment to a point where we saw an unemployment rate that was the lowest in 50 years. These are factors that helped to lift the American people out of poverty For instance, the unemployment rate reached 3.5% in 2019, a 50-year low, contributing to higher employment levels, particularly for minorities and low-wage workers. Now, I'll say this again, I've said it in previous episodes, a lot of that momentum can be attributed to the Obama administration. I know Republicans like to hate on Obama's economics, but he did have to wrestle with an economic recession, and I think what he did with unemployment was impressive. But I'll say for the second time that there was, under the Trump administration, an uptick in success in raising the wages for the American people and for adding jobs to the economy. Which is why when I see charts like this, I get furious. This is a misleading chart that was posted by the White House and deleted and reposted and deleted and reposted again multiple times because they know that this is a bunch of crap. The only reason that Trump's average is so low is because during COVID, the Democrats shut down the economy. And despite his attempts to reopen it, they would not allow it. That is why Trump's average is in the negatives. It's not because of the Republicans, it's because of the Democrats. And on the Joe Biden side, the vast majority, 2/3, and this is on our government website, 2/3 of the jobs that the Biden administration created were bounce back jobs that were created under the Trump administration. So this is a misleading chart. This is a lie. What you're looking at here is actually the success of the Trump administration being accredited to the Biden administration, and that makes me angry. Once you do the math, Donald Trump created 6.6 million jobs. Once you subtract the bounce back jobs, Joe Biden created a whopping total of 4 million jobs. And many of them have been disappearing over the last year. The fact of the matter is that 8.5 million Americans were lifted off of food stamps under the Trump economy. And when Kamala Harris looks into the camera and tells you that Donald Trump wants to cut welfare programs, that is just a lie. The only thing that Donald Trump wants to do is make it harder for people to abuse the system. How? Let's review. In 2019, the administration introduced a rule that limited the ability of states to waive existing work requirements for able-bodied adults with no dependents. So that is a perfectly healthy grown adult who is capable of working and has no children and no elderly depending on them. Just a perfectly healthy adult capable of working. Basically, Donald Trump said that if you want to receive welfare, you need to be working at least 20 hours a week or be participating in a training program that will equip you to rejoin the workforce. What is wrong with that? First of all, that is not cutting welfare programs. As a matter of fact, it's reserving money for people who do need welfare by reducing the number of people on welfare who don't actually need it. Now, to me, this is kind of a waste of time because statistically, only 1% to 2% of people are actually abusing the system. And Republicans would argue, okay, but in a population of 333 million people, that statistic accounts for a lot of money. And that's true. But I will say this, he's definitely not cutting welfare benefits. That is just a lie. That is a misleading statement by the Democrats that should not be paid any attention to because it's worthless. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the Earned Income Tax Credit. Now let's talk about the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. These are policies that Kamala Harris is campaigning extraordinarily hard on, despite the fact that these are not her original ideas. These are tax credits that have existed long before she came into office that were increased under the Donald Trump era. So I'm not sure why this is her whole entire platform, but we can fairly say that this is not her program. Great that it's on her agenda, but it's also on Donald Trump's agenda. So make of that what you want. Although I will say this, I'm going to credit Kamala Harris because during her time as a senator, she was a very vocal supporter of the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. So despite the fact that these policies existed before she ran for president, she was always a supporter. So we can credit her for that. She's also advocated for lowering prescription drug costs, which disproportionately affect low-income families. Her plan, however, is again pretty much a copy and paste of things that Trump has already done and plans to continue to do if he wins the election. For example, here is a very long list of ways that Donald Trump has worked to keep prescription drug costs low on behalf of the American people. The most favored nation rule, which aimed to reduce prices of Medicare Part B drugs by tying them to low prices in other countries. So basically, Donald Trump said, hey, this country's only paying this amount of money for this drug. Why are we paying 10 times more? No. Straight up no. That's what the Trump administration said, which lowered the cost of prescription drugs in America. Second, he allowed drug imports. So he worked on allowing states to import cheaper prescription drugs from countries like Canada, where drugs are significantly lower in cost. The goal was to increase competition and drive down prices. So the companies in America who were charging extravagant prices for these drugs now had to compete with Canadian companies who were charging significantly less. This also lowered the cost of drugs. Next, Donald Trump ended the pharmacy gag clause. He signed legislation that prohibited gag clauses in pharmacy contracts. What does that mean? That means that before Donald Trump created this law, pharmacies were not allowed to tell you that there was a cheaper option sitting behind the counter. So if you were paying hundreds of dollars for name brand medicine, they weren't allowed to tell you that there was a cheaper generic option sitting right over there. So Donald Trump lifted that clause and allowed pharmacists to let you know that there is a cheaper option available.
Kamala Harris did make a good point when she called out Donald Trump for failing to meet his promise on one issue, and that was the ability to negotiate drug prices. I'm not really sure why, but Donald Trump did promise that he was going to allow this practice, and it never happened.
But at the end of the day, the Trump agenda on behalf of drug pricing is significantly longer, more detailed, and comes with a proven record by the Trump administration in terms of what they've done for the country. So there it is, the plans side by side. As a member of the upper middle class, I feel morally obligated to cast my vote in the direction that is going to make the biggest impact on people who don't have the privileges that I have. I think it's very privileged to say that, oh, I can swipe these economic issues off the table because I don't like the things that come out of Trump's mouth. And to people who can barely afford groceries right now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. They have more important things to worry about than being called a childless cat lady. And how lovely if that is your main concern. How lovely if you're so well off in this world that you can think about things like that. But there are people who are too focused on feeding their children to really give a crap about what's coming out of Donald's mouth. They're far more focused on economic policy, on housing policy, perhaps on prison reform. These are all things that I've decided are more important than personality. I could take the easy road. I could say, oh yeah, I want to be on Team Swift. I want to be on Team Beyonce because it's cool and it's fun and because people are going to clap for me. Yeah, you're on the team of the good guys. Clap, 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 clap. And I could take my applause and I could take a big bow and I could say, thank you. I'm such a good person. Thank you. But that's just not how it really is. When you take the time to examine the issues, it is far more complicated than that. I'm in my 30s. I don't have kids yet. Am I offended by childless cat lady? No, I don't care. I care about the people that have children to feed. I care about the people who are interested in home ownership. I refuse to sit in the comfort of my upper middle class tax bracket and vote based on personality, because to me that is irresponsible, that is childish, and that is dangerous for the people who are going to be economically impacted by the outcome of this election. I think it's important to know what you're voting for. And that's why we're here. Thanks for watching Swing Voter Central, and I'll see you next time.